Hi there. We'll get started in a few minutes. I just want to make sure folks can hear me. Um, if you can hear me just in the chat box, just let me know that you can hear me. Great. Thank you very much. All right. Like I said, we'll get started about 5 minutes. All right. Thank you. Hi, everybody. We got 3 attendees. I'm going to give it just a couple more minutes, see if a couple more people float in, like just happened. We'll get started in a couple minutes. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Statistics Solutions Chapter 5 webinar. This Chapter 5 is the discussion. Usually, I mean, this is based on the typical social sciences 5-chapter dissertation. We have a support person on, Brittany, with us, who is posting some helpful links for you, links to our website, links to the archive on our website where we archive the webinars. So if you want to go back to it, or send somebody, who wasn't able to make it, you can tell them about it. And a place where you can schedule a consultation if you feel you want to after hearing what we offer and just kind of, our presentation. So if you, like I said, we do have a technical a person on, a support person. If you have any kind of technical questions or anything about the availability of the things we just covered, you can ask Brittany. She can also help you with any technical issues that may come up. As far as content questions, you are welcome to type them into the chat box or the question and answer box as we go along, so you don't forget your questions. That's fine. I just won't get to them until the end. All right, so let's get going. If you've made it to the Chapter 5, then congratulations. It's as you know, then it's kind of been probably been a long journey. And if you're not to the Chapter 5 yet and you're just kind of sitting in to kind of get an idea of what to expect, that's fine too. You'll be there, and congratulations when you do. Okay. So Chapter 5 is the discussion section, and this is where you interpret or you discuss your results that you obtained, that you got from Chapter 4. So this is the typical contents of Chapter 5. Now, the expectations and the contents of Chapter 5 are pretty general. I mean, not general, but pretty standard. In other words, the expectations are pretty standard across the board. However, sometimes schools do have, their own kind of particulars. Maybe they want headers a certain way to certain language in your headers, or they want things rearranged a little differently, and that's all fine. So you should always be working from your school's guidelines, your school's template, first and foremost. Again, if you don't have those for whatever reason, or your school doesn't provide them, which is sometimes the case, this will offer you a good general kind of setup for the chapter 5. So here are the things we're going to cover: the sections, the introduction, interpretation section, limitations, implications for practice, recommendations for further research, summary. Okay, so the introduction. So the chapter 5 should kind of be able to stand as a standalone chapter. So in your introduction, it's always helpful to remind the reader of your research problem, or the purpose of your study, why your study was important to conduct. And it doesn't need to be lengthy. It's just to kind of reorient your reader about what you were doing and why. You can also preview the contents of the chapter if you want, briefly in the introduction. But again, follow your template. Sometimes schools want you to kind of give a brief summary of the entire dissertation until this point. And that doesn't sound as bad as isn't as bad as it sounds. It's kind of a brief kind of summary of your methods and things like that. So just double check your template. Okay, the interpretations of the findings section, or sometimes this is called the discussion section, and I know it's the discussion section within the discussion chapter, but just check your template. But interpretation of the findings is pretty standard. This is the real heart of the chapter. This is where when they say interpret your findings, it's not that you kind of look at your own findings and try to decipher what they mean. What they mean by interpretation is you kind of see what your findings can tell us by relating your findings to those of previous research on your topic. So the best way to handle this this section is, first of all, make sections. It's going to be easier for you as a writer to compartmentalize the information. It's going to be easier to handle. It's going to make more sense to you, because if you just start discussing things without an organizational scheme, you're going to get lost, and that's going to be evident to your reader. And subsectioning this section out is also reader friendly. Right. So if you're quant, you can use subheaders based on your RQs, like research question 1, lay out your research question, restate it, summarize it, give a brief summary for it. And this is chapter 5 is really kind of a plain spoken chapter. There's not a lot of statistics in it. Those are all in chapter 4. Lay out your research question, summarize what you found, and then get into the discussion, which is what you're doing is bringing in major research from your chapter 2 on that finding, and noting whether your findings support the previous research or they don't, or how your findings are situated in that previous research. So you want to note whether your findings do support or don't support, or sometimes they offer something new, right? And it can be language like, my findings do not support the findings of Smith, who found, whatever it was that Smith found, or my findings do support the findings of Smith. Or previous findings could be kind of inconclusive and mixed. You want to state that and note, where your findings fall within those mixed findings, what they support, what they don't support. You want to do that for every research question, right? So if you have just quantitative, you have 4 research questions, just do the same thing for each research question. If you're study is qualitative study, you want to base these subheadings on your themes, right? So for qualitative studies, your findings typically take the form of themes. So theme 1, lay out the theme, kind of summarize briefly, what you found. And then same thing for what I just said for the quant. Situate your finding in relation to findings of previous literature from chapter 2, noting where your findings support previous literature or they diverge from previous findings, or again, they add something new, which is important. Where your findings don't support previous research, it's customary to offer an explanation of why your findings might be different. Sometimes it might have to do with your particular sample. It might have to do with, there's certain things that may make your findings different. Maybe it had to do with a weakness. Maybe if it was quantitative, your sample was low, like too low, that could have affected your results. But usually a brief explanation of why your findings diverge from previous research, if they do. Then you can make conclusions based on those, what you found in relation to previous findings. So if your findings confirm previous research, then you can make a conclusion about whatever it is your research question asks. If your findings don't align with previous research, then that suggests that there's still some inconclusiveness, right? And you can pick back up on that in the later section on recommendations for further research. Okay, and do that, like I said, for each RQ or each theme, right? Okay, next is the limitations, and just double check your template. Sometimes the limitations has its own section. Sometimes people fold it into the discussion section at the end. I think either one is fine, but just again, if your template is asking for something particular, you want to use that. Limitations are any shortcomings or weaknesses that may have affected your results. So for quantitative studies, typical limitations are things like your sample size was too low, right? So that affects the statistical certainty of your results. You definitely want to say that. Now that doesn't undercut your results. It doesn't mean nothing's any good. It just means that it may have affected your results. So you want to your reader wants to interpret your results with those limitations in mind. Sometimes you can't get the population, the sample, particular people you wanted, so you have to use a proxy sample. So anything like that may have affected your results. Usually in chapters 1 and or chapter 3 in your proposal, there's limitation sections where you kind of forecast what might be limitations in your study. It's always helpful to go back to those sections to see if actually what you thought before you conducted it, if those things actually turned out to be limitations. So that's helpful for you to go back and look at too. Let's see, we're still kind of dealing with COVID to some degree. So sometimes that gets in the way of people's studies or changes the way they had to go about their study, which could have, pose a potential limitation. Also, it's usually customary here to discuss the generalizability of your findings to the larger population. Usually for quantitative studies, if you had an adequate sample size, like you had enough people in your sample, your findings should generally generalize pretty well. Your sampling procedure also affects your generalizability. So like random sampling helps increase your generalizability because it's kind of more reflective of the larger population. Things like convenience sampling tend to decrease your generalizability a little bit because those are participants you got because it was convenient to you, not from a random process. For qualitative studies, your findings won't generalize well, and that's just the nature of qualitative studies because you have, by nature and by design, a low sample, right? You're interviewing people, you can't interview 100 people. So you're usually interviewing 8, 10, 12 people, maybe 15. And qualitative studies are designed to get that in-depth information that quantitative studies can't get. So you need to just mention that if your study's qualitative, it's not really a limitation, but just that your findings won't generalize well, but they're not meant to, right? They're meant to get that in-depth information. And we conduct, studies for a reason, right? To give us information, to give us valuable information. And part of the value of that information is what it can tell us about practice, or how it can inform practice in that area of study. So, what do your findings mean for professionals in your field? What do they mean for practitioners in your field? If you conducted an education study, of course, it depends on, what you study precisely, but your results could have implications of the level of practice for teachers. It might have implications for administrators. There might be implications for other stakeholders like parents or even students. Again, it depends on what you studied specifically, but if it's for teachers, say it's something like shows that the teachers need more professional development in a certain area. That was your study. You can get kind of nuts and bolts. You can get specific here and say that, but what form might that professional development take? On the job, training, or more kind of encouragement and money for professional development outside of the institution, like professional development opportunities that the school doesn't offer, something like conferences or something. So you can get kind of nuts and bolts here and specific about your implications for practice and who it impacts, and how your findings might inform those folks. And also recommendations for further research. This is important, and you see this in studies, probably the studies that you read. At the end, based on what you found, and also in some cases on limitations, what do you recommend that researchers focus on moving forward? So recommendations based on your findings, any findings that don't support previous research that suggests inconclusiveness, like where your findings are different, that suggests some degree of inconclusiveness. You can recommend further research there. Any kind of findings that are new or unexpected or novel, that would warrant further research. You could also recommend different types of studies to get different kinds of information. So if you conducted a quantitative study and you thought it would be a good idea maybe to get more in-depth information to explore the topic in more depth than you can with a quantitative study, you could recommend a qualitative study to get that kind of information. You could recommend something like a case study, which has multiple data sources to get a more comprehensive understanding of the topic. So things like that. There are different kinds of studies that are designed to get different types of information. And if you do recommend those, which is fine, just kind of have a little explanation of why, say you're recommending a case study, for example. And I think that would generally involve getting, a more comprehensive view because you have, more data sources. And recommendations based on limitations. The idea here is that, if you had a limitation that may have affected your results, that you could recommend that researchers replicate your study, but that they just moving forward, they address whatever limitation or limitations you had in your study. And the summary. So the summary kind of has to do double duty, because it's not only the summary of the chapter, but it's the summary of your entire study. And check your template for your school, because sometimes some schools just let you end with recommendations for further research. Then you're good. Some schools want a summary. If they do, it's not a big deal. It's you just recap major points from the chapter, right? And but also, since it is the summary of the entire study, you want to leave the reader with a take-home message, right? That encapsulates the most important aspects, or the most important things or findings from your study that you want the reader to remember. Okay, usually not too long, a solid paragraph, maybe a couple paragraphs. Keep it tight, remind the reader of what you are trying to do. Recap your major findings, the major points from the chapter, and leave them with that message about the important things about your study that you want them to leave your study with. I think that's it. Going back to the interpretations of the findings, sometimes your template or your chair will want you to interpret your findings or discuss your findings in relation to your theory. Sometimes that can be woven into, if it makes sense to include that discussion in your discussion of your research questions or your themes, you can fold it in. Sometimes, if that doesn't seem easy to you or seem like it's working, you can also have a separate section, something like connections to theory or links to theory, something like that. And you can just have a separate section where you discuss what you found in relation to your theory. Usually you start off by reminding the reader of the theory, what the theory means, its definition, and then you can talk about how your findings kind of confirm the theory, or they don't confirm the theory, or if they kind of modify our understandings of the theory. Again, that's sometimes it's needed in the chapter 5, sometimes it's not. So there's a couple of ways to handle it. Like I said, you can fold it into the overall discussion or have a separate section. Okay, that's kind of generally the idea of the 5. Well, let me get to the end here, sorry. Oops. Okay, this is, before I open it up to questions, this is who we are. This is what we do. It's our phone number, email. Somebody's available to have a consultation with you to see if what we offer is right for what you need. So contact us if you think you would need help or just like to find out about what we offer. Now I'll turn it over to questions. If you guys have questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those for you about the chapter 5. You can type your questions in the question and answer box or the chat box, either one. Any questions? Great, thank you, Sharon. Can we get this presentation emailed to us? I think the easiest thing to do is just go to that link that Brittany posted earlier in the chat box, and they're archived right on our website. So you can just click that and go right to it. Just check the archives. Okay, and there you go. There's thank you, Brittany. Great, thank you, Sharon. Okay, anybody else? Any other Any other questions? So everybody's good with the 5? Great, you're welcome. You're welcome, Lindsay. Okay, well then I'll let everybody go. Thank you for attending. Again, if you have, questions about what we do or just want to talk to somebody about what we do, give us a call or shoot us an email. Great, thank you, everybody. Thank you for the kind words and thank you for attending. And we offer other webinars on other chapters and specific topics, usually to do with methodology. So check our website, see what we're offering and when. And have a great day, everybody. Thank you.